felek saldın beni cevri cepağa. Hey hey felek saldın beni cevri cepağa. Derdim bulgaç yıkılap demem sen bir vapağa. Derdim bulgaç yıkılap demem sen bir vapağa. Derdim bulgaç yıkılap demem sen bir vapağa.
Welcome to Window to China and the Xinyu 101. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Richard Taylor and Mr. David Case to the show today. Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Richard Tiller. I'm author of the book Tough Conversations with the Heart of Jesus.
And I'm David Case, and I direct a program at Truro Anglican Church for internationals that are new to the community.
Welcome to you all. Can you tell me more about the tapes? I have been knowing the tapes and the David Case for 10 years. That's an amazing program. Can you tell me more?
TIPS, Truro International Programs and Services, was started 30 years ago. We're just entering our 4th decade, and its whole mission is to extend hospitality and friendship to those who are new to our community, to do it within the context of Christian love, and with the hope that we can serve them with the needs that they know that they need for language and cultural assistance, and also just to support them in their marriages, their families, their professional life, and their spiritual life.
John, this program is wonderful. I can prove that. I consider that my first home in U.S.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here. Mr. Richard Taylor, that's the author of Tough Conversations with the Heart of Jesus. Can I ask you, why is the heart of Jesus?
Well, the heart of Jesus is a heart that cares more about the well-being of the other person. So if I'm in a tough conversation with the heart of Jesus, I'm focusing on their well-being more than my own. And I'm also focusing on making sure that whatever number of people are in the conversation, they're all better off at the end of the conversation than they were at the beginning. I'm focused on that goal. So the heart of Jesus it's a heart without fear. It's a heart of strength that comes from the fact that love conquers fear.
How we can conquer the fear with love?
Well, the fear that we experience in tough conversations, there's a lot of different things that we can be afraid of, but they all trace back to the primary fear of that something bad is going to happen to us. So it could be that the conversation might turn ugly, or that the relationship will get damaged, or the fear that we might get hurt, or we might hurt the other person. But even if we hurt the other person, that's still something bad happening to us. It could be the fear that we'll act bad, or look bad, or feel bad. But all of those fears, they still trace back to the primary fear that something bad will happen to us. So the goal in a tough conversation is to take that fear out of play. I want to take it out of play for me. I also want to take it out of play for the other person. So the way to take fear out of play, the way to go into the conversation that I don't have any fear, is I go into the conversation, I prepare for it by focusing on the needs and the well-being and the dignity of the other person instead of my own. We're all at our best and strongest when we're focused on the well-being of other people. And we're all at our worst and weakest when we're focused primarily on our own well-being. So focusing on the well-being of the other person, even if it's someone that I don't like, focusing on their well-being will help me feel strong going into the conversation, and it'll take my fear out of play.
Wonderful. So, Mr. Case, what do you understand that can be taught through Jesus' words, actions, or some people have learned from him during the conversation?
I would say that Jesus is the great communicator. In his life, he's probably most well known in our world today as a great teacher, but he was also involved in some very, very challenging and difficult conversations between his followers and himself, and between those who opposed him and felt threatened by his presence and by his leadership and his example of working with people. And Jesus is a wonderful role model in that he cares for those who have no voice at all. He also, as Rich just said, he cares for those who maybe have too much voice and that they are the dominant people. But he cares for their well-being, even if what they say isn't either correct or accurate or kind. So Jesus provides some wonderful examples for us in a variety of situations on how to deal with difficult conversations. And I think one of the most memorable statements that Jesus had in a tough conversation was with a woman who had been caught in adultery, who was brought to him for condemnation. So tough words were being used, and the last words that he said to her brought hope to her. When she was brought for death, he gave her life, and he said, "Go, be a new person. Go and sin no more. I do not condemn you." But beautiful words.
Like Mr. Richard said, love can conquer the fear. Do you have any Bible verses on that? Love drives away fear?
Yeah, that what you just said is one of the verses. That comes from the Apostle John, and in the first letter that he wrote, he says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." And that's 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, exactly what you said. And then one that I particularly like, because it talks about love, but also in the sense of putting the needs and the well-being and the dignity of the other person first. The Apostle Paul says in his letter to the Philippians, this is chapter 2 and it's verses 3 and 4. He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves." So that's a good example of the heart of Jesus. He goes on to say, "Each of you should look not only to your own self-interests, but also to the interests of others."
I mean, everybody faces tough conversations in our life, whether with our family members or others. So I think very often people just avoidance. I know love can make peace. Do you think avoidance can make peace as well?
Well, if you're trying to figure out whether to avoid a tough conversation, the first thing to look at is just take an honest look as best you can at what do you think will happen if the conversation never takes place. You feel like maybe I ought to talk to this person, but if the conversation doesn't take place, what will happen? Now, sometimes a problem just goes away. With the passage of time, it just takes care of itself. So that would be a time when it would be okay to avoid a tough conversation. But most of the time, in your heart, you know that the conversation needs to happen. And if you know that and then still avoid it, what will usually happen is that the problem gets worse. As time passes, it festers, it becomes more of a grievance, it just keeps getting worse. So you want to then have this tough conversation, speaking the truth in love, and letting that love conquer the fear.
What is the culture things, different group of people?
Many of our international neighbors in Fairfax County come from cultures that I would describe as honor-shame-based cultures, where it's more important for them to honor their family than it is for them to achieve personal success. It's more important for them to maintain unity within their family system. So loyalty is very, very important. Many of those folks, and you represent that culture, and many East Asians, South Asians represent that culture where they do not have cultural permission to say no. And it's a situation where face-saving, not wanting to embarrass the other person, may result in a conversation that just doesn't happen that really ought to happen, because they don't know how to culturally get over this lack of permission to address a difficult situation. A personal example. I'm a new father, and I have a Chinese daughter who married our oldest son this summer. In the course of their courtship and their relationship, her Chinese parents really struggled with a number of issues, and difficult conversations took place between her and her parents, and at times the conversation broke down completely. We tried to enter the conversation as well to bring about a harmonious understanding of our son's intent to marry their daughter, and there were times where conversation just didn't happen. But with persistence and with seeking to honor her parents, and that was very important for us, that we would honor her parents' values, her parents' opinions. Over time, they came to realize that their daughter was sincerely happy, and that's what they want for their daughter. So they granted her their blessing, their permission to marry our son, and now we're doubly blessed.
I know that. Thank you for build up the very good relations between your son and your daughter, Chinese daughter now. Also, speaking of the position people try to gain in the conversations, so how you can think that they can win to save other people's dignity in the conversation, at the same time you want to win the conversation. What is the position of strength people trying to gain?
Well, the position of strength really comes from focusing on the needs and the well-being and the dignity of the other person. Just because we're all at our best and strongest when we're focused on the well-being of other people. So that's the position of strength we want to take into a tough conversation. Now, here's the thing. Oftentimes when we say we want the position of strength, that implies that we want the other person to have the position of weakness. But in tough conversations, it doesn't work that way. You want the other person to have the same position of strength that you have. Because if they feel weak and fearful, then they'll be defensive and anxious and agitated. And so you don't want any fear on their end either, because once you take a fear out of the conversation on both sides, that's when the defenses come down, and that's when the possibilities open up. So you're not trying to win a position of strength from the other person, you're trying to share your position of strength with them. And so you're going into the conversation thinking, I'm not afraid of this conversation. I'm embracing the conversation, sort of like what you were talking about. I'm embracing the conversation as an opportunity for a resolution, or sometimes a breakthrough, occasionally even a transformation that could not have happened any other way.
Can I jump in here right now? I had read 2 great books this summer, and one was Richard's book on Tough Conversations with the Heart of Jesus. One of the huge takeaways for me was that so often when we enter a conversation where there's conflict, we just want to win. We want to resolve it. But what Rich brought out is that conversations could be win-lose. They could be lose-lose. But the goal is that they would be win-win. And it takes 2 to dance. So if the other person doesn't want to participate, it's not going to happen. And we're not responsible for the other person, but we are responsible for ourselves and how we treat them and how we respect and honor them. And to the degree that we do well, we increase the likelihood that a conflict can be resolved in a way where both of them would come away saying, you know, I'm glad we had that chance to talk. Maybe I didn't get everything I wanted, but I'm not a loser here. Both of us are winners.
I have read this book too. That's wonderful. There are a lot of good examples in this book. Can I ask you, all the samples are true stories or just some of fiction?
Well, some of them are written with me in the story. All of those are true. The stories that don't have me in them are, for the most part, they're composites. Like there might be a couple of stories that I drew from. So they're stories that are valid examples, but they're not true in the word-to-word sense. They're taken from truth, but sometimes I'll take a couple of conversations that have really happened and combine it into one to make a point that's just easier for a reader to understand in a shorter number of pages.
You might say historical fiction in this sense.
From your book, I think it's important we learn through the tough conversations, we will see the opportunity to can make transformation with other people's, get the goal, win-win. So can you give me an example how people successful through the conversation with you?
Well, in my work specifically, let's say I'm a manager. So part of my career was in management. So I have a person who works for me, and I have to persuade them that they need to do a better job, for example. So again, with the same idea, looking out for their needs and well-being and dignity, I want the conversation to encourage them, and then there's a verse that says, speak the truth in love. So I have to say what needs to be said, and I have to say it when it needs to be said. I can't put off this conversation, because the sooner the employee does a better job, the better for everybody. So I need to have the conversation sooner as opposed to later. And there's got to be a gentleness, but also a complete truthness. If the person needs to improve, then I need to explain to them what they need to improve, how to do it, and how I will know that they've done it. So it's respectful, it's gentle. I tell them why I believe they can be successful, and that I do believe in them, but also stressing the need that this has to happen. And then I have to gain a commitment from them that they will do it and when they will do it. So there's got to be a commitment. And sometimes we just say, well, will you do this? But then I also have to say, when will you do it? Because a commitment without a deadline isn't really a commitment.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tough conversation is tough. So when people want to win, sometimes the tough conversation set the stage. Either you have to choose right side or wrong side. It's kind of set up the tough the stage for people. So when the things go badly, what strategies people can learn from your book can turn things around? Well,
let's say you're in a conversation and maybe you think it's going okay, but all of a sudden it explodes. Sort of very suddenly the person gets very angry, and it just feels like everything is out of control. The first thing you have to remember is it's only a moment. Sometimes when something really startling happens, or something kind of ferocious, it feels like it's the end of the story, like there's no moving forward. But these sorts of things are very natural in a tough conversation, and they're not the end of the story. So we have to envision the conversation moving forward. And so we maintain those three values, looking out for the needs and the well-being and the dignity of the other person, apologizing if necessary. I mean, sometimes I'll say something I just shouldn't have said, and I apologize. But the idea is there's still time to make it right. Whatever got broken in the conversation, there's still time to fix it. So you're thinking in terms of of the actual fix. And one other thing would be to make sure I'm not bringing any other baggage into the conversation that doesn't belong there. So let's say I'm going into a tough conversation and I have these other memories or resentments or fears or anxieties, and they don't really have anything to do with the conversation, but they're in my head, and then somehow in the conversation they start coming out. Well, I just have to be alert to that so that I'm not doing that. I mean, that's something I can prevent consciously. So I just have to think, don't let anything into the conversation that's really about something else. And I have to be sensitive that maybe the other person is doing that too. Maybe they've let something from their past into the conversation. So I want to be sensitive to that and patient. Again, letting it work its way through and making it not the end of the story, but just a work in progress. And then if I'm sensitive to this, then I'm not taking it personally. I'm not overreacting to it because I'm thinking of a bigger picture and a good resolution from the conversation.
Can I give a real-world example that also I think is very common in this particular area? We have many, many children in our Fairfax County, Northern Virginia school system that come from families who have immigrated here for the sake of their children's education. And mom and dad have left careers and many things behind so that their kids can have opportunities here that perhaps were not available in their home country. Their children come and they adapt very rapidly and quickly to the lifestyle and values of the United States, making choices, independence. Parents tend to still be very conservative and heritage-oriented. And so the conversation comes up when it's time to go to college. Where do you go to college? Well, both might have a different opinion. And then you have conflict. In a typical American, European, ancestral or descendant type family, it might be where the son or daughter has a stronger voice. But in a family where heritage is very important, where status of school is very important and perhaps more important than the subject area, then the parents will carry a lot of weight, and that can cause conflict, not just in the selection of school, but in the selection of major. I've talked with so many of our international friends, and they studied something not because they were interested in it or because they were good in it, but because daddy said so. And it didn't necessarily open up an opportunity for employment, but it got them an education. And we do a survey, and perhaps when you were a student with our program 10 years ago, you were a part of this. It's a national survey, but we've done it locally as well. And we've asked our students, what's your greatest desire for your children? And oftentimes with international parents, it's their desire for their children is success. And that same question has been asked of American families who have been here for more generations. And their answer is their greatest desire for their children is happiness. So you have success and you have happiness, and I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of difference between the two when you ask them to explain what they mean. But sometimes the child is focused on happiness and the parent is focused on success, and it creates a wedge. And our encouragement within those family systems is keep listening, keep talking, don't shout, give yourself time, seek to honor one another, and things will work out.
That is a very good example. Also, I think skills is important through the tough conversation, but the heart of Jesus, that's even more important than anything else. So can you summarize some principles in your book that can apply for the life?
Well, the main idea of the book probably is that not to fear tough conversations, but to embrace them as opportunities for resolution or breakthroughs or transformations. And then with the heart of Jesus, it's focusing on the well-being of the other person, putting them first, and that kind of a giving spirit. And then that then leads to the next point, which would be how to take fear out of play. That is the way, because perfect love, selfless love, drives out fear. So I'm seeking to lift the other person up, not tear them down. Even when the conversation turns bad, like we were talking a minute ago, even at that moment, I need to be focused on lifting the other person up, but telling the truth that needs to be told. So that would be the heart of Jesus.
Thank you, both of you, joining us. We will wrap up, but through your book, I have read that it's worth to read. The principles in this book help us to succeed in tough conversations. Also, the same as can help us succeed in life. Thank you for joining us. Then thank you for watching. We will see you next time. Bye-bye. Window to China and Xinyu 11 has reached out to the hundreds of Chinese community, Asian community, and American community on performance, interview in education, politics, culture, etc. It's a link for all the communities. Xinyu and Judy Wu, the publisher AC Business, are making joint efforts to promote the program on Newspaper Weekly. Window to China and Xinyu 11 is a 30 minutes long English program. It will be available on YouTube, Facebook, Google+, AC Business News by keywords Window to China and Xinyu 11.